Hundreds of Pacific islands should be thriving, but they're emptying out at an alarming rate. While the world focuses on rising seas as the culprit, the real story reveals a modern echo of one of history's darkest chapters. You've probably seen the headlines about Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, and other Pacific nations facing extinction from climate change. It's a compelling narrative. Tiny island paradises, slowly swallowed by rising oceans, their people forced to abandon ancestral homes forever. But here's what those stories miss. These islands aren't dying from climate change alone. They're bleeding people for a much more immediate reason: economics. The numbers tell a startling story. Pacific Island nations maintain fertility rates above 2.1 births per woman, well above the replacement level needed to sustain a population. Meanwhile, Australia sits at 1.50 births per woman, and New Zealand at 1.56. By basic math, the islands should be growing while the developed nations shrink. Instead, the opposite happens. Young Pacific Islanders leave in droves for Australia, New Zealand, and other wealthy countries, not because their islands are sinking, but because they need jobs that pay a living wage. This creates a devastating paradox. Islands produce enough children to thrive, but can't offer them a future worth staying for. As one researcher explained, every resident needs to earn, and if the home can't pay, people will leave. To understand how we got here, we need to look back at a dark period in Pacific history. In the 1860s, Peruvian slave ships kidnapped 250 Tokelauans, roughly half the population of the atolls of Fakaufu, Nukunonu, and Atafu. This practice, known as blackbirding, saw ships systematically kidnap Pacific people for labor in sugar plantations and mines across the region. Today's migration follows an eerily similar pattern, except now it's legal. Instead of ships with chains, we have government recruiters with contracts and visas. Australia and New Zealand actively recruit Pacific workers for their care homes, farms, and construction sites, jobs their own aging, low-fertility populations can't fill. The difference is rights on paper, but for many communities, the outcome remains the same. People leave and communities shrink. This isn't migration by choice, it's migration by necessity. Take Papua New Guinea, where a local councillor in the Karima district reported that 40,000 people had moved to higher ground since 2015. That's not just climate displacement, it's economic displacement accelerated by environmental pressure. When your coastal village floods and there's no local economy to rebuild with, the choice becomes simple: move inland to poverty or move abroad to opportunity. The climate threat is undeniably real and accelerating. Global sea levels have risen approximately 10 centimeters since 1993, and the rate of increase has doubled over the past 3 decades. Around Tuvalu specifically, sea levels have risen about 15 centimeters in just the past 30 years. For a nation with an average elevation of only 2 meters above sea level, that's not a future threat, it's a current crisis. Tuvalu's 11,000 people are squeezed onto just 26 square kilometers of land. Their airport floods regularly. Saltwater intrusion is contaminating their groundwater supplies, turning freshwater scarcity from a future projection into today's reality. Roads, homes, and critical infrastructure face increasing vulnerability to flooding with each passing year. But here's the crucial point. If Tuvalu had a booming economy, they'd find ways to adapt. The Netherlands sits largely below sea level and thrives because they have the resources to engineer solutions. Singapore transformed from a swampy island to a global financial hub through economic development. The difference isn't elevation, it's economics. The Marshall Islands face similar challenges across their 1,156 individual islands, spanning 180 square kilometers. With a population of 42,050 people, they're dealing with the same double squeeze: environmental pressure making life harder, and economic pressure making living more attractive. 90% of the Pacific's population lives within 5 kilometers of coastlines, putting the vast majority at immediate risk from both rising seas and storm surge. Palau illustrates the scale of vulnerability, with 25% of its island population living below 10 meters elevation. But again, elevation alone doesn't determine outcomes. What determines outcomes is whether people can earn enough locally to justify the increasing costs and risks of staying. This dynamic explains why climate conferences often frustrate Pacific leaders. Papua New Guinea withdrew from the November 2024 UN Climate Change Conference, calling it a total waste of time. Their frustration makes sense when you consider the disconnect. International forums focus on long-term emission reductions, while Pacific communities need immediate economic solutions. The brain drain compounds every other challenge these islands face. When your brightest young people leave for Sydney or Auckland, who's left to innovate local solutions? Who's left to start businesses, run schools, or develop new industries? The islands lose not just population, but the human capital needed to adapt and thrive. Consider Tuvalu's impossible position. They must continue investing in infrastructure, airports, roads, power systems, knowing that their nation might be uninhabitable by mid-century. Every development decision becomes a calculation. Is this worth building if we might need to abandon it in 25 years? This uncertainty discourages both local investment and international business development. Meanwhile, the receiving countries benefit enormously from this arrangement. Australia and New Zealand get young, motivated workers to fill critical labour shortages in sectors their own ageing populations can't staff. They gain human capital without the cost of education. The islands paid for that. It's a perfect solution for developed nations facing demographic decline, but it's devastating for the communities losing their future. The recruitment isn't random or accidental. It's systematic and increasingly sophisticated. Pacific workers are specifically sought for industries where local workers are scarce: elder care, seasonal agriculture, hospitality. These sectors require young, physically capable people, exactly the demographic the islands need to retain for their own development. Some islands are trying innovative approaches. Tuvalu has signed a relocation agreement with Australia that includes a mobility component allowing Tuvaluans permanent residence, work, and study rights. They're pursuing cultural preservation projects to maintain identity during potential relocation. It's a recognition that the writing may be on the wall, but also an attempt to maintain some control over their destiny. In December 2024, Pacific Island nations launched an unprecedented coordinated legal action, pushing for the International Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on state responsibility for climate change harm. They're essentially asking, if your emissions are drowning our countries, what do you owe us? This legal strategy reveals sophisticated thinking about international accountability. These nations recognize that traditional climate negotiations move too slowly for their immediate needs. By pursuing legal frameworks, they're attempting to establish binding obligations rather than voluntary commitments. But legal victories won't solve the fundamental economic equation that drives migration. Even if international courts establish climate reparations, even if adaptation funding flows more freely, the islands still need ways to generate income that compete with opportunities abroad. The tragedy is that many Pacific islands have significant unrealized potential. They sit in some of the world's most valuable fishing grounds. They could become hubs for renewable energy development, taking advantage of constant trade winds and abundant solar exposure. Their strategic locations could make them valuable for shipping, telecommunications, or scientific research. The problem is that realizing this potential requires investment, and investment requires confidence in long-term viability. When your island might be underwater in 30 years, long-term investment becomes nearly impossible to justify. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Climate threats undermine economic confidence, economic weakness accelerates emigration, and emigration ensures that adaptation becomes impossible. Some observers point to historical precedents for hope. Easter Island's inhabitants cleared their forests before 1650, preventing canoe building and effectively trapping themselves on their island. They adapted by developing new forms of social organization and subsistence. Tikopia has maintained a stable population for centuries, despite extreme isolation. Human societies have repeatedly shown remarkable adaptability when migration isn't an option. But those historical examples occurred when isolated populations had no choice but to adapt locally. Today's Pacific Islanders face the opposite situation. Migration is not only possible, but actively encouraged by labor-hungry developed nations. Why struggle with rising seas and limited local opportunities when Australia offers immediate work visas? The existential question facing Pacific Islands isn't really about climate science or sea level projections. It's about whether any small island economy can compete with the opportunities available in wealthy nations connected to global markets. Climate change simply accelerates an economic dynamic that was already unsustainable. Behind those paradise postcards lies a harder truth. The South Pacific is becoming a region of stopovers for tourists and guest workers passing through, but not a place where people can build futures. The islands risk becoming empty museums of their own cultures, maintained by international preservation funds, but no longer lived in by vibrant communities. Yet, this isn't inevitable. If the international community treated island economies with the same urgency as island emissions, different outcomes become possible. If climate adaptation included serious economic development, not just seawalls and early warning systems, migration could become a choice rather than a necessity. The Pacific Islands represent humanity's first test case for climate adaptation at a national scale. How we handle their crisis will set precedents for millions of other vulnerable communities worldwide. The question isn't whether we can save every atoll from rising seas, it's whether we can create conditions where people want to stay and fight for their homes, rather than abandon them for better opportunities elsewhere. The real reason so many Pacific Islands are emptying isn't just rising water, it's the rising gap between local opportunities and global possibilities. Until we address that economic equation, the Pacific will continue bleeding people regardless of how many climate conferences we hold or how much adaptation funding we provide. The islands need more than survival, they need a reason to thrive.